happy to see you, and I hope you're all doing well. And by the time you're listening to me, I hope that you have either watched the video clip about the road to Emmaus or you've read the scripture passage. So there's just a couple of quick points that I want to talk about here that I think are important to think about, especially at this particular juncture in what we're going through. You know that I'm very fond of this story because I appreciate how exciting it must have been for these two men as they're traveling to come upon Jesus unknowingly and have him unfold the stories of the Old Testament that speak to who he is. I mean, it must have just been an incredible discussion for them to have. And I often think about how lucky they were to have that explained to them in that kind of detail. You know, when we struggle with so many parts of scripture and really trying to understand it, to have the author of all scripture in front of you saying, no, silly, this is what this means. And just must have been an incredible experience. But in the unfolding of those stories, when I was reflecting about that, I was reminded of something that my mother shared with me many years ago. She and my dad used to go out for date night. Now, long before date night was important or even something people did, this was something that they would do on Saturday evenings. My dad was a dairy farmer, so he would manage to wrap up things early on Saturday nights, and they would go out dancing. And she really looked forward to this. And one of the times, she told me about this experience, she was getting ready and, she's putting her makeup on and doing her hair and all of that. And she just started to recite a prayer in French that her mother had taught her years ago. Now, her mother at this point had probably been dead for about a dozen years. And she said that she was so moved by that experience because she just sat in memory of her mother for this time. And her mother, by the way, only spoke French. She came to the United States from Canada as a young bride, and she never learned the language. So everyone spoke French to Meme, as she was called. And my mother was just taken aback by the gush of memory and tenderness that came through this just automatic recitation of this prayer that her mother had taught her. And she shared that with me sometime later. And I remember being so impressed with my mother's vulnerability. And when she shared with me that, and she wept a little bit, and she told me how much she missed her mother, and she felt that it was God's way of reminding her about her mother. And I always just thought that that was a very tender story. And I appreciated her passing that on to me because it showed me what her faith was like. And it showed me that it was okay for me as a person, first a teenager and then a young adult, and now obviously a much older adult, to understand that these stories happen to all of us, and that it's very important that we pass them on. Because when we share those kinds of stories with our children, we help them to understand the depth of our faith. And when they're in times of crisis, they will remember that their parents had faith and that they too can have faith. So always try to think about what those stories in your life, which you may think, I don't have any stories like that. I bet you do. I bet you really do have stories when you've had an experience of faith which has caused you to understand that, yes, I really do believe. And I would urge you and encourage you to share those stories with your children, because they will add to the stories of their faith. Just like Jesus showed the stories in the Bible and how they pertain to him, you're sharing stories in your life and showing how your faith is weaving out throughout them. And however small or insignificant you may think those stories are, your children will not feel that way. They'll feel just the same way that I did when my mother shared that story with me. They'll feel honored to hear those stories, and they'll remember them, and they'll draw upon them to use them in times of faith when they may be in a particular crisis. So it's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to share our memories of faith and what that could mean for the people who come after us. The other thing I want to talk about just a little bit is the story of how these men witnessed something so profound. They witnessed something profound, they knew it was profound, and the first thing that they did is they shared it. They went back to Jerusalem and shared their story. And that's the point too that draws into the first, is that we have stories, we need to share them. But the part two that also I want to spend time on is the Eucharist. You know, it says that they recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread. Well, you know, you and I have talked about this before. It wasn't physically the breaking of the bread that they recognized. It was Jesus in preparing the Eucharist, right? In the consecration of the Eucharist, where they came to understand that's who Jesus was. And in that most basic element, we get to understand a little bit more about the liturgy and what does the liturgy unfold for us in this way. So what I would like you to do now is to spend some time watching the next clip, which is called The Veil Removed. And I think that you will find that it will do a really nice job sewing together all the elements of what we've worked on today. And I really hope you enjoy it. Stay though, because I'm going to convince Father Joe to break this open a little bit more for us. Okay, thanks. Good to talk to you guys, and I'll reach out soon. Bye-bye.